So the very end of chapter 12 began speaking about basically the types of prophets or people that don't really listen for one reason or another. Right, and the view or the strategy of the prophets that are mentioned at the end of chapter 12 was, Yechezkel's views, right? They're not gonna, or his what he's saying is not gonna happen for a long time, right? So that was their strategy. That strategy is not one that hits against Yechezkel. It assumes very possibly that Yechezkel in fact was a prophet. It's not saying he's not a prophet. He's just saying his prophecies are for a significantly later time, and therefore you shouldn't have to worry about it. And Yechezkel's response is absolutely not. This is imminent. This is happening right now. We're going to continue that theme that we left off chapter 12 with, talking about. So the truth is, the end of chapter 12 was not clearly talking about prophets. Maybe it's prophets, maybe it's other people, but their strategy wasn't to deny Yechezkel's prophecy. It was just to say it's not relevant to us because it's for a later time. What we have in chapter 13 is a couple of other types of arguments in terms of what Yechezkel was dealing with during his time period, and kind of gives you a little bit of a better sense as to what the Avira, what the zeitgeist was amongst these people in terms of what they're hearing on the streets and what they're contending with, right? It happens to be, it's a very funny chapter given like modern events, and just whenever you read certain things immediately come to mind. But right, the notion of fake news is going to be very prevalent in the first part of the parak, and then they were talking about wall at some point in this chapter. It's just like, I'm like this, I'm just laughing as I'm reading it. But you'll see as we go. Okay, so chapter 13. Vahidvar Hashem Elai Lemor. And the word of God came to me, saying, Ben Adam hinave el nivi'ei Yisrael hanibaim v'amarta l'nivi'ei milibam shimud var Hashem. So there's an interesting debate in this very first pasuk, which I think is really interesting, between what I'd call the traditional approach and what you could call the more modern approach. So the traditional approach, the Mitzvahs David and others say these are Nevi'ei Sheker. These are false prophets, right? These are not true prophets. These are, by every definition, false prophets. They're not called false prophets at any point. They're called Nevi'ei Milibam, right? Prophets who prophesy from their hearts. We're going to see the Radak later is going to allude to the possibility that maybe we're talking about diviners, right? People who kind of find out information in some other format so they have the street credit as prophets, so to speak, and then use that divination skill basically for their own desires. And then there's a third possibility, which the modern Mefarshim tried to argue, which is that maybe these are actual prophets who kind of went bad, right? Who they had true prophecy at one point, and at this point they're prophesying from their hearts as opposed to prophesying from, and that's the great. They're called Nevi'ei El Nevi'ei Yisrael Nibaim, but Nevi'ei Milibam, right? They're called Nevi'im like 3 times in different formats in that first line, but that now they're prophesying from their hearts. And if that last case is true, then you can only imagine how hard it was for the Jews to decipher good guy from bad guy. If you're telling me that it's not just that there was a clear dichotomy, Nevi'ei Sheker and Nevi'ei Hashem, but there are the diviners who can somehow get to certain factual information about the future and then use that as leverage to prove that their worth, A, and B, that there were in fact Nevi'ei Hashem that for one reason or another become bad apples, again, for whatever reason, then you can only imagine the challenging arena in which Yechezkel is dealing. So he says here now, these false prophets, or these prophets who went bad. Ko amar Hashem Elokim, hoy al haniviim hanivalim asher holchim acharucham v'vilti ra'u. right? So, as much as the first line sounded like maybe there's a possibility of them being true prophets, right? The second pasuk certainly, right, is much more in the camp of those more traditional commentators like the Mitzvah David, that these are in fact false prophets, right? Woe unto these prophets, these discussing prophets who go after their own breath without having seen anything that they're claiming to have seen. And this is a fascinating mashal. Kishulaim bachoravot neviecha Yisrael hayu. They were like foxes in the breaches, in the broken down sections, and we'll see in a second what they don't do. Maybe them, maybe other people. Again, there's another debate in Pasuk K, but just the notion of a fox. So one idea that I came across was that foxes don't tend to stand their ground, right? They're not quite as territorial. They tend to go underground and hide, basically. So they go from one. If you approach them at a breach, so to speak, they're going to kind of shy away and find somewhere else to dig their hole, which I'm sure is only half true, right? I'm sure every fox has their line in the sand where if you get too close to their pups or whatnot, but they're not quite as territorial as, let's say, pride of lions are or whatnot, that if you get in their territory, you're going to be attacked in that way. Also, the notion of a fox running through the destruction is actually an image that shows up in a whole bunch of different places, both in Chazal and just in the prophecies of Yeshayahu and in other prophets as well. And for Yechezkel to take that notion of kind of the fox who kind of dwells in the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, and to turn these Nevi'ei Sheker into those Shulaim, it's this really amazing image of, right, they're prophesying again and again and again about, oh, this isn't going to happen, and those are the people, right, in some ways that you imagine, right, walking amongst the destruction, right, realizing their hand in that ultimate destruction, which I think is fascinating to think about. Big picture Tanakh as a mashal. I never seen this or read this reference to. I didn't remember it when I had learned it the first time. I was fascinated by that line of comparing these Nevi'im to foxes, and you have the obvious like sly fox references in terms of, right, duping the Jewish people and their innocence with their schemes.
So were their prophecies the same, or were they all different?
So I think there's probably a certain overlap, right? It sounds like one of the major overlaps was that one of two things: either, like we saw at the end of the last chapter, you're in a distant future situation, and or no, we're the meat, and the Yerushalayim is our pot, right? That's going to protect us. We're the chosen people. We're going to be good. The people who are exiled, they're the ones that God doesn't care about anymore, right? I think that's the general sense that we've gotten to this point. That's what they're hearing. That's the word on the street, so to speak. So I don't know if they were all exactly the same, but I think they're all in that wheelhouse.
Because I was going to say, I know before in learning about false prophets, one of the things that, so to speak, gave them away is that they all said the exact same thing. I think that was in the time of Yehoshaphat, where he checked to see should he go to war, should he not, or something along those lines. And
right.
They all said the same thing, and that was like a tip-off that they were false prophets. They wouldn't all have the exact same prophecy. So
even if that is a good way of testing it, I think that you will find most people would think that's counterintuitive, right? If they're hearing a multitude of voices saying X, and then in that echo chamber of one perspective you have Yechezkel screaming out Y, it's going to be hard to choose Yechezkel over, right, that plethora of people going the other direction. So it could be that works that way. I'm not really sure. It's not clear. He kind of does group them all together. At the same time, we have these little pockets. We have those who say it's the distant future. These people who are called the Nevi'ei Sheker. We're going to have the female diviners at some point later in this chapter. We have a couple of different groupings. So it sounds like they're different, each one of them, but the impression that's given is that overall they're pushing in one direction. It's a good question. Pasuk Hey. Lo alisem bepratzos vatigdiru gader al beit Yisrael la'amod b'milchama b'yom Hashem. Right, and this is kind of building off of that previous line. You did not step into the breaches, right, to fence up the breaks in the walls for the Jewish people to stand basically and fight for the day of Hashem. Right, in other words, you're contributing to the day of Hashem and not actually stepping in to try and help mend any of those gaps. Now, fascinatingly here, so simple reading, we're still talking to the same prophets, right? This is just a continuation of the conversation to the prophets. Inexplicably, a whole bunch of the Mefarshim, I haven't figured out what's driving this. A lot of them decide that this is actually talking to the leaders. That's some of the people that we talked about in previous chapters. And for some reason, we took a hiatus from talking to these prophets directly. But it was all those leaders who Yechezkel had seen die and who he mourned over in some of the previous chapters, that those are the people that he's talking to right now, because you didn't step into the breach, as opposed to, right? And let's take a step back. If in fact, right, these prophets are false prophets, then you're more inclined to understand why they're reading this not about the false prophets. Because the reality is that, was there any expectation for the false prophets to be stepping into the breaches? Probably not. If in fact these people are true prophets who have gone bad, right, so then reading this as talking about the prophets still makes a tremendous amount of sense, right? You could have done something. You had the power. You were, right, a big player, and you didn't. At the same time, you could just you could almost as easily say, no, even the false prophets, right, they still could have helped, right? They still could have, right, tried to turn the tide towards Yechezkel's perspective, in theory, even if they weren't true prophets. They could have used whatever leverage they had, either from their divination or good luck in guessing, right, that they could have helped the process. I'm not sure. But for whatever reason, a lot of the Mefarshim say what's going on here in this pasuk, Lo litim b'pratzos, is talking to the leadership of the Jewish people as opposed to these prophets who are the subject of the majority of this chapter. So it's a little bit of an interesting read, but I thought I'd point it out. Pasuk Vav, Chazu Shav, the Kesem Kazav, Ha'omrim Ne'um Hashem, V'Hashem Lo Shalcham, V'Chalu L'Kayem Davar. Right, so they see nothingness, or they see the futility, the Kesem Kazav, and they divine, again, worthless things. So saith the Lord, I did not send them, and their word will not come true. So what they're telling you is misleading and not helpful and not true. Pasuk Zayin. Hello mechazei shav chazisem umiksam kazav amartem ve'omrim ne'um Hashem v'ani lo dibarti. Right? They say these ridiculous things and they say, "Oh, God spoke to me, but I didn't speak to them." Lachein ko amar Hashem Elokim ya'and daberchem shav chazisem kazav lachein hineni aleichem ne'um Hashem Elokim. And therefore, because you said these terrible things, you said these things that are not true, therefore I, God, am coming against you. Right? You put words into my mouth, well, now you're going to have to deal with me. V'isayadi el hanevi'im hachozim shav, in my hand. Right? So again, it's a power play. God's going to put down these prophets who claim to see these false things. The kosmim kazav. Besod ami lo yiyu uvichtav beit Yisrael lo yikasevu ve'admat Yisrael lo yavou v'datem kani Hashem Elokim. Right, so three things he says to them. He says, amongst the inner sanctum of my people, you will not be included. Amongst those written in amongst the Jewish people, you will be written out, and the land of the Jewish people, you will no longer be included in that as well, because of these false things. Now, one of the fascinating things that happens in prophecy often is, depending on the audience, different people kind of get a pass or not a pass in the process, right? It's really interesting. In this moment, Yechezkel is talking either to the prophets or to leadership. And in either case, by doing so, all of a sudden, Ami becomes above reproach, right? Being a part of Ami, right? Being part of my nation is all of a sudden, right? As if the nation was very well behaved and were perfect. But when prophets focus on the sins of the leadership, one of the things they often will do is they'll cut a divide between the leaders and kind of the followers, and say, well, if not for these leaders, then right, these followers very well may have been righteous and good standing citizens, but they were misled. And then you'll have other chapters where he's talking to the Amcha, and he's lambasting them for all the different things that they've done wrong. And it's like, was he talking the same? And it's really just kind of a focus thing, right? Whenever, right here, he's talking to the leadership, whether it's the secular leadership or the prophets' leadership, well, whoever he's talking to, he's using that as a rhetoric almost to differentiate the Ami, right, the nation from, right, these leaders. It's just an interesting point that he highlights them as outside of the people, as if the people were, right, not to be blamed for any of what's going wrong. And obviously getting them out of Israel, right, is exactly what they latently fear and have been prophesying to the contrary. Ya'an uviya'an hitu et ami lemor shalom ve'ein shalom. Right, so again and again, you've caused my people, my nation, to think that peace is coming, but there is no peace. V'hu boneh chayitz v'inam tachim oso tafel. Right, and they build these flimsy walls, and they put over plaster to kind of make them look pretty, but they're not gonna last. This word tafel, the Radak says it's using a clay material, but not putting it through a kiln. So we're going to see in a second that water itself is going to cause it to kind of wash away to some extent. So basically, you build these flimsy walls, and then you cover them with plaster to make them look pretty, right? To make them look like, oh wow, we have a wall here, but in fact, it's just this thin drywall, whatnot, something situation here that it's not going to actually hold anything back, right? And more el techei tafel vayipol, right? You're gonna say, oh, plaster this walls, but it's gonna fall down. Hayagashim shotef va'atena avnei al gabish. There's gonna be this very strong rain and these massive hailstones. V'tipolna, which are going to knock down this wall. V'ruach sarot tibakeya, and the great storm will crack the walls. So basically, right, they're reassuring the Jewish people, so to speak, and by doing so, putting up these fake walls, right, which is the irony of them not standing in the breaches earlier, but yet, right, they put up instead these fake, right, walls in those places, and they make them look all pretty with plaster and whatnot, but not things that actually are going to do any protection. And due to that, or because of that, right, the Jews are actually much more exposed and don't even realize that they're so exposed. Right, and this is part of the challenge, right? One of the things that we don't see so much in Yechezkel, but we see a lot more in the Nevi'im that are prophesying in Yerushalayim, is they're trying to get the Jews to do tshuva. Right? We don't get that sense from Yechezkel too much. Again, he's prophesying to his people who are outside of the land of Israel, about the people in the land of Israel, to kind of get them to realize they're the chosen people. Different goal. The prophets in Israel are trying to get the Jews to do teshuva. And instead, they're hearing, you're the chosen people, you're fine, you're good, it's peaceful, we're going to be great. Yechezkel's prophecies are for the distant future. So what that does is that creates this false sense of security that puts up these faux walls all around that are merely plaster, they're merely just look nice, but at the end of the day, right, you're not protecting anything. You are actually causing the Jews to think that they don't need to repent when in fact they do. So it's actually particularly dangerous. Fine. Lachem kol amar Hashem Elokim uvakati ruach sa'arot b'chamasi v'geshem shotef avapi v'yeh avnei al gabish b'chema lachala. So God's anger is mentioned in three different ways, right? That because of this, all these things are going to happen, right? The storm, the driving rain, and these great hailstones are all going to break down these faux walls in anger. V'arasti es hakira shir tachtem tapel v'higatiu el haaretz v'nigla yisodo. Right, and the whole wall will be destroyed, and we will reveal its foundation, which is basically it's the raising of the wall. V'nafla v'chelisam b'socha b'yidatem keni Hashem, and it will fall, and you will perish within it, and you will know that I am Hashem your God. V'chilesi es chamasi bakir v'atachim oso tafel v'omar lachem ein hakir v'ein atachim oso. Right, there is no wall, there is no plaster. Right, it's like a matrix line. Right, it's not even there basically. Nevi'ei Yisrael haniba'im el Yerushalayim v'achozim lachazon shalom ve'ein shalom ne'um Hashem Elokim. And here again, right, is a line like the first line that seems to call them real prophets, and yet, right, false, not true. But right, not their prophecy is not true, but they still seem to be called true prophets. The Nevi'im of Yisrael who prophesy about Yerushalayim and see this vision of peace, but there is no peace. I am Hashem. Ve'ata ben adam sim panecha el benos amecha hamit nabot b'libehen v'nave aleihem. So now we shift to another segment. Again, it's going to seem to be still part of the same genre, though again the direction of his prophecies has just shifted from the regular prophets to these female prophets. I'm trying to remember. I don't think there's anything else I need to add about that. Give me 1 second. Oh, so one thing I missed. So the one interesting thing before we start this last section of prophets is it's not clear, but there is a subtle shift that you could argue happens here as well. So in the beginning of this chapter, it's not 100% clear exactly who's being addressed in terms of who the false prophets are. It's possible, right, that some of these prophets are in fact prophets that are in exile with Ezekiel. When he starts talking about the wall situation, so Dr. Tova Ganzel suggests that it's more clearly talking about people in Israel when it starts talking about how these prophets are not going to be part of my nation, not part of the land of Israel, and then talking about this whole wall situation. She thinks that is more clearly talking about prophets who are in Israel particularly. So you could, if you wanted, right, say that there is even another category somewhere in there of prophets he's talking to who are with him in Bavel, who are talking about the people still as kind of being this forgotten people, in theory. It's not clear either way, but I didn't think of it when we were reading through it, but I thought I would mention that. So now we have this last crew.
Who is he addressing now? In other words, who is his audience? His audience is clearly in Bavel.
Yeah.
Does he have an audience in Israel at all?
Right, so it's hard to know. He has these.
Who?
Right. He has some of these flying situations, but we don't have that here, right? Where he flew to Israel and either saw and then reported back, or was it all vision? We talked about this a little bit, but in this chapter, it seems to be talking about to the people outside of Israel, and the main and again, I think the main goal is the re-education of these Jews in Bavel to realize how far, right, the Jews in Israel have strayed, and trying to explain to them, right, that's been the main goal of his, to convey to them that they are in fact the future, and it's been hard for them to get through their heads. So one of the ways that he's trying to do that is by explaining how it all went wrong. But he seems to be talking to the prophets in Israel. So I don't know exactly how to put those two things together, but it's a.
It's alternating between third to second person.
Yeah.
That's why it was such a hard thing. And that's why you had such a hard time with talking to the leadership. What do you mean? 2 seconds ago, I was talking to the Nevi'im.
Yeah.
But it altered between third person, second person, and went back to third person again. And
Right.
it just keeps going back and forth. So it just seems almost like it's almost a random pattern. It's almost.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard to figure out exactly who he's talking to. Talking about even is hard, but talking to is like there's no indication. Right? We had some cases where the elders of Bavel come to him. We see them sitting in front of him, right? So in those situations, much easier to like, oh, this is who he's talking to. This is when this happened. Exactly, it's much easier here, much harder. And like, I'm not really suggesting this, but for all we know, right, this prophecy is not dated, right? Like we assume it's just going in order at this point until we have another break where it actually tells us exactly when the prophecy takes place. But it's possible it's happened before the whole exiling of. It's possible. It's just not clear, but we don't get any indication who exactly he's talking to. So that's why it's a great question, but I don't have a good answer.
One more great question. Chlitem b'tocha, and you're going to be finished.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to imply death.
Yeah.
Yidatem k'nei Hashem, and then you're going to know that.
Yeah,
I
I think it's.
What does that mean? And then you're going to know that I'm God. You're dead.
Yeah, but we believe that there's a future after death.
I
So
understand that.
you'll know.
In what sense are you going to know? I mean, I'm going to punish you, and you're going to be dead. Then you're going to know I'm here. You know?
Right. So it's like when we're on our way to Bubby and Zadie's house, and Moshe says to me, "Did Bubby make the chocolate chip cookies?" And I said, "Well, Moshe, we could call Bubby, or we could just wait until we get there and we'll find out." So I don't know what it can look like after you die and what it means to Yadatem et Hashem, but whatever. Hopefully after 120 we'll all find out what that means. Fine. So now we have these ladies. Pasuk Yechezkel. V'amarta ko amar Hashem Elokim hoy lemisarot kisasot al kol atilei yadai v'asot misbachot al rosh kol komal utoded nefashot hanefashot titzodedna la'ami unefashot lechena tichayena. Okay, so. So, woe, right? So to those who put together pillows, right? Who sew pillows. I don't know what you do with pillows, right? To those who put together pillows, and right. Also, misbachot is to make veils. Al rosh kol kumal tzodei nefashos nafsho. Right. So basically, they put all of these comfort things. They put these comfort things together in order to basically catch the souls of my nation. Will you catch will you ensnare their souls? So exactly this notion of it. So first of all, two things. One, it's so fascinating to me, right? A modern situation like this. It's a little bit. This is very not PC. This section of the text, kind of just highlighting, female prophets and talking about the sewing and other things like that, I think would be like in today's day and age would so not fly. It's interesting though, right, that different prophets kind of used whatever means, we'll call particularly false prophets, right, use whatever means is at their disposal in order to try to convey or make a certain point, right? So when it came to the false prophets who were men, right, so it's more about, right, the plastering walls and here, instead of it being about, right, creating this false sense of security, it's about creating creature comforts, right, and trying to kind of, everything's fine. We have, right, all these various, right, pillows and curtains and whatnot, and you can continue to beautify your situation without having to worry about, right, what's to come. Vatechalelna osi el ami b'sha'ale. And again, if you just, it's kind of the undercurrent of this chapter, right? So I pointed out the first time it happened, but this distinction between these leaders and ami, it just runs through the whole chapter, and it's just fascinating because there will be times when Yechezkel seems to be very much, right, angry with the ami too. So it's just interesting when he's angry with the leadership, the ami kind of get the pass. Vatechalelna osi el ami b'sha'alei se'orim u'b'totei lechem la'amit nafshot asher lo timutena u'lachayot nefashot asher lo techayena u'v'chazevtem la'ami shom'ei chazav. Right, so you have, again, this time using food, right? Again, more creature comforts, but fistfuls of barley, morsels of bread. But so here, I misread that. The se'orim and the p'tutei lechem here brings us to our last category of diviner. So we talked about how there was one group of people who Yechezkel calls them out because they're just saying it's not going to be for a while. Okay, he says no, it's going to be now. There's this second group of people who say we're all safe, we're all good, right? And they either were prophets, weren't prophets, whatever they were, but they're touting about shalom and peace and everything else, and they're wrong. And then these ladies who, right, highlight the creature comforts that we have, but they do so for a morsel of barley or bread. So this was a different conversation for, like, there's a big notion in Tanakh of there being almost like pay to play, right? That prophets, particularly false prophets, would be paid, right, for their prophecy. And so they were either fed or whatnot, but basically they had a retainer with a particular king or whatnot, right? You'll pay me whatever, you'll tell me what I need to say, and right, we need to go to war, right? War is great, we should go to war, we should not go to war. Whatever you tell me, you pay me, and I'll divine whatever it is we need. So here we kind of these are, I would say, the bottom dwelling of the prophets who are doing so. They're not bringing the big bucks here, right? I don't know if you want to call it gender inequality when it comes to prophets getting paid here, but these ladies are getting only handfuls of barley and morsels of bread, right, for their work here. Like I said, I was reading through this parak, and I just felt like every single modern topic was like, I'm like, hey, we got PC, we got gender equality, we got building a wall, we have the fake news. I'm like, this is a crazy chapter if you wanted to just overlay it with modern politics.
This is nothing new under the sun.
Right, exactly. It's just whatever. It's just I found it hysterical.
Is this the same time as Huldah was prophesying?
Huldah Haniviyah. No, we saw Huldah. Huldah was earlier. Huldah, right? We saw her in Malachim.
Right, but wasn't it?
It wasn't all the way to the Kiyahu time. It was earlier.
Didn't she prophesy when Yirmiyahu prophesied?
Yeah.
And he's prophesying.
He's after. He's after. Yirmiyahu's like a king earlier, or 2 kings earlier, in Yerushalayim. They overlap a little bit. The beginning of Yechezkel's life overlaps with the end of Yirmiyahu's life. So it's possible Huldah is there, but Hulda's a little earlier, I think. Yirmiyahu is certainly earlier than Yechezkel. Fine. Pasuk Chav. Lachein kol amar Hashem Elokim hineni el kisosei chena asher atena mitzodedos sham es hanefshos leporchos v'karati osam me'al zrooseichem v'shilachti es hanefshos asher atem mitzodedos es nefashim leporchos. So, right, again, in the same way that the plastered walls end up becoming kind of the focus of God's anger towards those earlier group. So here, these cushions and curtains become the focus for these ladies. Right, I'm against your cushions, which you ensnare souls, causing them to fly away. I'll tear them off of your arms, and I'll free the people whose souls you ensnared to make them fly away. Again, striking this very strong divide between the people and the people who are misleading them. V'karati es misbechoseichem v'hitzalti es ami miyedechen v'lo yiyod biyedechen lemitzuda v'datem keni Hashem. Right, so it's interesting also, and I don't know what to do with this exactly, right, but you don't get the same ensnaring language that you get with the previous prophets. I'm not sure why. You get that they're just wrong and that people are listening to them, but you don't get the same seductive is not the right word, but it seems more the language of, right, I'll save them from your hands, right? You were a trap, mitzuda, right? There's more of this entrapment situation going on here. I didn't see anybody talk too much about it, but it's hard to miss. So I just wanted to just note it as something to think about as to how exactly they were more ensnaring than the previous group. I don't know, but something to think about. Yan hakot leiv tzadik sheker vani lo hich avtiv ulechalek yedei rasha levilti shuv midarko hara lahachayoso. Right, because you break the heart of the righteous, one with falsehood, whereas I do not pain him, and to strengthen the hands of the wicked one, keeping him from repenting of his way to sustain him. Really could be talking about everybody in this chapter, right? And this is what I was highlighting earlier, that one of the main problems with these false prophets is that not only are they directing the Jews in the wrong way, right, in terms of what their future is going to be, but more importantly, interpersonal or inter-God, man-God relationship, right, when you think that you're on the straight and narrow when you're not. And this, by the way, as a rabbi, is a really scary notion, because prophets true prophets have prophecy. God speaks to them. They can misinterpret their prophecy, but still they literally have God on their shoulder trying to tell them what's the right way to direct people. The false prophets, right, they know that they're making stuff up, right? Like they know God's not talking to them. That's the whole point. Rabbis today, we don't have prophecy, right? But people turn to rabbis often for some form of spiritual direction, and it's terrifying when you think about, right, that if you misdirect, right, that me versus the leadership, it's a very scary chapter, personally. But anyways, on that note, Rabbi Zach is leaving. So yeah, so
you're it, man. I'm coming to you now. If I wasn't leaving, you'd be in trouble.
So Ya'an Hakazot Lev Tzadik Sheker Vani. Right, finding. Chav Gimel Lachen Shav Lo Sechazena V'Kasem Lo Sik Samna Od V'Tzalti Es Ami Mi'edchen Vidaten Ki Ani Hashem. Right, so even though right, these last verses are really talking to these ladies. A lot of this is very applicable to what he said earlier as well. But the falsehoods that you're saying and the divinations that you've divined, right, I will save my people again from your hands, and you will know as well that I am Hashem. So just building off of the point that Benji made earlier. So the previous guys, right, the ones who are, and again, depending on your orientation, you're gonna think about this differently. But the previous grouping, right, Benji pointed out, right, you will be utterly destroyed, right? That's how their end. That's how the prophecy ends about them. The ladies here don't get that. So Dr. Tova Genzel wanted to suggest that the reason for that is, we noted, right, I made a joke about it, the gender inequality in terms of what they're getting paid, right, morsels and barley. So Dr. Genzel points out it's very possible, right, that food was, we know from other sources that food was pretty scarce at that time. So if these women at the end here are using this platform to make a buck because they're desperate, Les Mis style, right? So it's still a heinous thing. It's still gonna, right, be called out and attacked by Yechezkel. But the bottom line is that there's a little bit more Rahmanas for that group of prophets as opposed to the ones who are cozying up to the leadership, so to speak, who could step into the breaches and don't step into the breaches. And especially, and this is what I mean by changing your orientation. I'm not sure which one you think is worse. Do you think that the true prophet that goes bad is worse, or do you think that the false prophet who never had anything is? I'm not sure. You can go either way with that. But either way, regardless of how you interpret it, right, that first group, right, the result of their prophecy is destruction, death, and then no God, as opposed to these ladies who, right, the direct things that they use to entice and ensnare, the pillows and the curtains, so those things, right, get the wrath of God, but they themselves are never said they'll be destroyed, maybe because, right, Yechezkel noted himself, for the morsels of bread and the little bit of barley. Barley's not fancy food, right? Barley is like animal fodder, right? So they're getting, right, as a little bit of sustenance from this process, and it's possible because of their desperation and their need, right? Again, they're not held to the torch quite like that first group. So we have these 3, maybe 4 groupings of people that Yechezkel is targeting in terms of the different levels of fake news, whether it's the people who say it's distant future, the people who are either part of the leadership or connected to leadership that don't step into the breach, who are either real prophets who've gone bad or false prophets all along. And then we have the people who are specifically in Yerushalayim for certain, which may be the same group as that first group, of that second group. And then you have this final group of the ladies who are diviners, which seem to be doing so mostly for food, and the kind of the different groupings and the direction that Yechezkel takes with each one of them. And that brings us to chapter Yud Daled. Any questions?
People had gone so far astray. If they would have chosen to do teshuva at that point, would that have been enough to change the course of history?
So it's very possible. We don't know. And this goes back to Benji's point earlier, who he's talking to, right? Because most of the people who he's talking about are in Israel. And at the end of the day, he is trying to still convince the people in Chutz La'aretz that they're the chosen people and that they need to reform their ways and that they have to be ready to take that mantelpiece when that time comes. But the people who he's talking about here, for the most part, are people who are not in front of him. So that's why it's so hard to really exactly know, right? And look, it's also possible, and again, I'll throw out another, right, out there possibility. It's possible that Yechezkel has enough name recognition at this point that when he prophesies in Bavel, word gets back. It's possible that the people in Israel hear about what that crazy Ezekiel is saying over the river. It is possible.
So he has never left Babel.
But I mean,
Right.
once he's exiled, so then we have a couple of instances in this book where he goes on these magic carpet rides that are unclear whether that's in real life or in just prophecy. But yeah, at this point he's not going anywhere. But yeah, it's not. I think Benji's question is a great question in terms of trying to think through, right, who exactly he's talking to. But we'll stop here.